I was asked to review a Choso suggestion by a guy in Discord named Purple, and going through my preliminary read-through, it's a pretty good suggestion. Ignoring grammar issues which aren't all that relevant, the Choso suggestion has a really interesting gimmick that requires him to make space before he can use his moves to their fullest potential, with the moves becoming really strong if the Choso user manages to set them up properly. Before we start reviewing the suggestion though, make sure to hit the subscribe button for more Jujutsu Shenanigans content. Now, let's start reading the suggestion. Starting with the special ability for Choso, we have Convergence. Convergence creates blood orbs that float around you, which can be stacked up to 4 times. The blood orbs which use special versions of your moves, which are covered later down the list. This gimmick is one that I like a lot because it's somewhat risk and reward. If there's an extended animation to create the blood orbs, then you need to create space to set them up, or else you're going to be interrupted and get comboed, which in this game, where most combos deal about 50% of your HP, is very, very punishing. So this encourages the Choso user to be careful with their distance, rather than just blindly rushdowning and unga bungling. Also, it can't be spammed since you don't want to be interrupted while you're creating an orb, so it makes it a pretty interesting kind of risk and reward trade-off, where you put yourself at risk for a chance at getting even stronger. It's an overall good idea that sets up Choso to be sort of a zoner, because he needs to make distance, and I'd say it could do a good job at also keeping fights alive, since the opponent would be more inclined to put pressure on the Choso and play aggressively against them, so that the Choso user doesn't have breathing room to set up their blood orbs. Next up is Piercing Blood, which has 2 variants to it, one with no convergence and one with convergence. The first version of it, which is one of 0 convergence, simply shoots out a blood beam that's a single shot. This move would most likely end up just being a standard zoner tool. If you're at a distance, you'll use the move and use it for free damage on the opponent. There's nothing too complicated with it. I'd probably expect the move to be blockable, or if there's a big start on it, I expect it to be dodgeable and unblockable instead. So depending on how you want the move to be countered, since with ranged projectiles, they either have to be blockable or they have to be dodgeable, because there always has to be counterplay for some sort of move. It's a standard ranged move, which would make Choso even more of a zoner in a sense, and it'd make Choso harder to approach from a distance, which is actually really good because it lets him set up his blood orbs and gives him the breathing room needed to make his moves more powerful. I'd say this move would turn out similarly to Lapis Blue and Toad, where it's kind of an auto lock-on, and it's a very fast, low startup projectile that puts pressure on whoever you're fighting and forces them to block from a distance. It might also be punishable, which would be fair, and it basically acts as a good zoner tool for Choso. Moving on to the maximum output version, which is what you get when you hold it, and presumably when you have a convergence orb on you, it makes the move more aimable and controllable, as well as letting it be used in the air. For the first impressions on this move, I'd say it'd just be a stronger version of the first move. It's implied that it's a guard break, considering that it's aimable and controllable, because with blockable moves, there really isn't that much point in having them be aimable and controllable, so this is going to probably be a guard breaking move that you have to manually aim to hit the opponent with, but I'd say this would be a very strong zoner tool. If you manage to get the distance for this, then you can use this move and it'll deal a lot of damage. Just a stronger version of the regular Piercing Blood. The only part of this move that I find somewhat concerning is the part where it says that you can use it in the air, because moves that can be used in the air also have a sort of side effect, which is that they cannot be interrupted. Because if someone's in the air, you can't really M1 them or stop them at all. You probably could with a ranged lock-on projectile like Lapis Blue or Toad, but for the vast majority of movesets, you can't interrupt someone once they're in the air. So that would make this move capable of being used as a get-out-of-jail-free card for the Choso user, since they can pop it and then float in the air if someone's close to them to immediately get out of that situation and hit back with a counterattack. It might be a little bit unbalanced, but depending on how hard it is to build up the blood orbs, it might also just end up being a nice little payoff for managing to make that distance. So I'm not sure how I feel about it, but it could probably be a pretty good thing, or at the same time something that becomes extremely unbalanced. It's one of those things that has to be smoothed out if it's implemented into the game, which this is just a suggestion, so of course it's not in the game or anything, but it is one of those things to think about. Moving on to the second move, which is Bloody Combat, it's just Curse Strikes. I think it's fine. Thematically it fits the whole theme of Yuji and Choso being brothers, but other than that, it looks like it would just be a standard combo tool. Choso doesn't really need a gap closer, so I wouldn't say it'd be used like Curse Strikes the same way Yuji uses it. So I feel like this is the kind of thing where if the Choso user manages to land an M1 combo, whether that be because they want some neutral interaction, then they're just going to use this move for some extra damage. Now, for the hold version of this move, which is Blood Edge, this one is a pretty interesting gimmick to it. It makes 2 Blood Daggers, and this replaces your Fist M1s to deal more damage. So, the thing about this move is that it's a self-buff, and those can be really interesting, because doing more passive damage with your M1s can really be a strong buff, damage-wise, because you can shred people's HP in combos by increasing the amount of damage an M1 does. However, I looked through the rest of the moves in this suggestion, and it seems that Choso isn't too heavy on M1 combo extenders, so it might actually end up being pretty balanced. Now, there's another gimmick to this, which is that you can throw out the daggers that you make and use them as projectiles to hit and stun the enemy. And I think this is also just a fine addition to it. You can sacrifice that M1 damage for a stun, which is really good, and I think it's just a good move. A lot of trade-off and some situational gimmicks to it that are pretty cool. They keep the flow of combat alive and reward the user for thinking and using their moves for the right scenario. Moving on to the 3 move, it's a counter. I think this fits Choso perfectly. Having a counter on zoners is generally just a good way to give zoners even more pressure to keep people off of them. Because if you rush down someone who has a counter too much, then they're going to use that counter and get the benefits of the counter. That's why it's a little bit difficult to rush down a Yuji, because you can try to punish them, but if they're not true stunned, then you're going to get Manji kicked, and then they're going to follow it up with some sort of move or some other thing to punish you for getting Manji kicked. Counters as a whole are just a really good way to shut down aggro, and for a zoner like what this suggestion wants to make Choso be, that's really valuable, so I think this move fits perfectly. The hold version of this, or the Convergence version I'd say, is Slicing Exorcism. It seems to just be a normal zoner move. You fire out spinning blood discs in your path, and these deal damage. Honestly, there's not much I can say about this other than it being a zoner tool, and more zoner tools just mean more pressure and ways to keep people away from you, as well as benefits for keeping people away from you, since you need this time and distance to actually get the move up and running. So it's just a good move that fits with what Choso is designed to be in its suggestion. Finally, for Supernova, you create orbs and you shoot them at your opponents, and then you can press 4 again to detonate them. This also seems like a good zoner tool as well. If someone's bum rushing you, then you can use Supernova, put these orbs in their path, and then detonate them as a way to force them to stay away. Or, alternatively, if the opponent isn't stupid, they're still going to have to go around the blood orbs, and that means they can't just bum rush you in a straight line. So they're still forced to take time to get around those orbs so that they can attack you. Basically making Choso really difficult to approach. And with all these moves in his base movesets, he's going to be a really annoying character if he was added as per the suggestion, though I don't think Z generally adds character suggestions, though I might be wrong about that. But this would make Choso extremely annoying to approach, which is kind of what zoners are. They're incredibly difficult to approach and can dominate a game from their distance, but if someone gets in too close, they kind of get screwed over, which also seems to be the case here since Choso has to set up his blood orbs by using his R Convergence ability. So it's a good concept, honestly, for the base. Moving on to the Awakening, he has an R special, which is a blood counter. So basically, if you get hit, you hit the person who hit you back, and then you get a defense buff. Generally, counters aren't that big of a deal in Awakenings, because Awakenings, by nature, are generally aggressive. People usually aren't trying to attack an Awakening, they're usually trying to run away or stay away from them until the Awakening is over. So I'm not sure how much benefit a counter in an Awakening would give you, but it's not to say it's completely useless, and besides, since it's not part of the 4 main moves, it doesn't need to be all that useful. It's fine being just this thing that you use in a very niche circumstance where it actually ends up being useful. Like if someone is bum rushing you or you're fighting another Awakening while in your Awakening. As for the first ultimate move, which is Blood Edge Swipe, it seems to be just like one of those close range moves you use if you manage to somehow get an M1 combo while in your Awakening. Do a quick jab, take aim to pierce their head with the blade, and then wind up to do a quick swipe. It seems like it's kind of move where it's just for extra damage close up, and judging by how these kind of moves tend to be in Awakenings, this probably does a lot of damage, so yeah, just extra damage for the Awakening. The second ultimate move is Blood Range. It rains down blood projectiles, and this seems like it would be one of those AoE moves that are really good for just dealing damage in a big area, especially on people trying to run away or people who are not very close to you. And that fits perfectly for an Awakening. Awakening should be able to chase people down, and saying that kind of got me some flack in the Shinjuku Yuji suggestion review, but it's true. If you can't attack people from a distance or close a gap like you can with Akari, then your Awakening is just going to get stalled out. So I'm glad to see that this suggestion creator added some Awakening moves that can be used from a distance to catch people. This third ultimate move, Blood Flow, seems to be along the same lines of the second ultimate move, so pretty much anything I said about the second ultimate move can apply here. Big AoE, good range, it's going to catch people who run away and deal damage. Just a good move. And finally, the fourth ultimate move is Blood Burst. Put your hands on the ground, and then you make an eruption of blood, making an AoE move. It seems something like this would be really useful for boss raiding. So if you're in a public server, and you're getting jumped by a bunch of people, say because you're using your ultimate, which happens a lot to Mahoraga players specifically, then you can pop this move and basically use it as a free get off me tool that damages anyone who's jumping you and forces them away. Usually with these kind of AoE eruption moves around you, they tend to have some form of hyper armor so that they can be used sort of like as a counter or get off me tool, but there's no specifications about that here, and honestly, it doesn't really need it here. It would be just fine without hyper armor, and moves in this game also just generally don't have hyper armor. In a sense, since it's an AoE move, I'd say it could be compared to a domain expansion in a sense, since you're just doing a bunch of damage around you, so overall I like the concept. Big AoE move, forces people to get off you, and good for fighting teamers. Overall, the suggestion is pretty good by my standards. It has a defined role that the character serves, rather than being some jumbled mess all over the place. It has an Awakening that actually feels like an Awakening, and wouldn't just get stalled out. And it has a unique gimmick that makes it something more than just a reskin of a bunch of other characters. It's a really good Choso suggestion that I had a lot of fun reading. And it's the kind of thing I could actually see being added into the game, which I can't say for every suggestion I read. With that, we're at the end of the video. Make sure to subscribe to my channel if you like my read through of the suggestion, because it seriously helps me continue to work on my YouTube channel. And I'll see you next time in another video. Bye.